In a lot of ways, Pokemon was basically the first MMORPG. Even if it wasn't online, there was this unprecedented social movement that got people outside playing games together IRL, and that community is still going strong today. I think one of the biggest factors to this longevity is the game's amazing battling system. I challenge you to name one other successful competitive turn-based JRPG. Aside from the obviously huge level of customization, from a mechanical perspective, both players input their moves at the same time, fundamentally differentiating it from some more traditional turn-based games. Basically, instead of sacrificing bait like you would in chess or checkers, you feint yourself into a more favorable position. If I know you're vulnerable, then I know you know to protect, which means I know to bulk up while you're not on the offensive, so I can sweep you before you know it. These types of mind games are very much what I'd consider to be the core of the game, but there's a lot more content on the cartridge. A lot of this is what I'd consider to be old carryover from JRPGs in the past, and unfortunately some of it gets in the way of Pokemon as a competitive strategy game. This is supposed to be the game you play with new friends on the playground, but it's difficult to casually challenge someone when it can take so long to build a good team. Pokemon has a ton of depth and strategy to it, but with such poor accessibility, things can get very irksome very easily. I find that the root of these problems stem from this formula here, which determines your Pokemon's 6 stats. Some of you may be familiar with it, and some of you may be going cross-eyed, but fear not. Over the course of this video, I'm going to explain my issues with the way the player interacts with these numbers, and propose some simple fixes that could ease frustration without affecting the game's balance. Later on, I'll also highlight some mechanics that could be streamlined or tweaked to make the player feel more in control of all the game's many systems. Number 1. Individual values. Pokemon's most pressing problem is that it suffers from a lack of accessibility. There are 6 numbers that each Pokemon has hidden on it, determining its genetic potential for battle, dubbed as IVs or individual values. The game never really tells you about them, and there's no way to identify exactly which stats you have without a calculator. Worst of all, there's no easy way to influence your Pokemon's IVs once they're generated, and breeding for them is an obnoxious time sink, especially since it's basically mandatory for competitive play. I honestly don't fully understand why the developers decided to design the IV system in this way, though I have some ideas. Primarily, they serve as subtle nuances between Pokemon of the same species. At the end of the day, each Pokemon is its own animal, and therefore this adds consistency when battling a mirror. When 2 Pokemon have the same speed, it's a 50-50 of who goes first. Given that this info is a big deal to predict what will happen in each turn, it's somewhat important we leave RNGesus out of the equation as much as we can. Unpredictable luck very much hurts the game's theme of reading your opponent's plays as they come out. That's why IVs establish an order of who goes first right off the bat, which a player can plan for. Of course, since having better IVs is a clear and objective advantage, everyone who knows about this secret mechanic is going to go the extra mile to stack their deck. In the end, this mechanic trivializes itself because there's hardly ever a reason to not have an Ubermensch. The obvious fix here is to just remove the mechanic outright, but since we want to avoid breaking any stratagems that involve any particular numbers, the best solution is to just let the player manually move the number up and down from a status screen or something. IVs create more problems than they solve, and any mechanic or metagame lost by their removal could be more enriching with subtle fixes. We've established that IVs sought to make a similar Pokemon feel different, but perhaps instead we could add some discrepancies amongst their designs. For example, breeding would now influence things like eye color, body proportions, and maybe even their animations to give them more personality, while not hurting competitive play or the overall creature design. Though that still leaves the issue with mirror matches leading to RNG. I realize that Pokemon's turn-based system is much more about taking your time to realize what the optimal play would be, but I believe that the best way to determine who goes first in mirrors would just be to pick the first player to input their command. That way there's a finely measurable value to determine who thought of the best idea in the least amount of time. Unless you want to go second. I guess you'd have to play chicken with the timer for that. Number 2. Effort values. EVs or effort values are the main way of optimizing your Pokemon for battle. From defeating foes in single player, you can earn up to 508 points to distribute amongst your 6 stats. Each point's a fourth of a tick, and your max investment is 252. The mechanic shares a lot of flaws with the IV system, just to a lesser extent. While not invisible, your only measure of a Pokemon's EVs is another numberless graph. While these stats are respectable, you can't just move the quantity of points. You'll have to clear the entire board and start grinding all over again. Either that or farm rare berries that lower a stat by 10 at a time. Right off the bat, all this grinding feels arbitrary and all these numbers feel needlessly obfuscated, so I think the player would feel better informed and more in control of these points if they were just tied to the leveling system. Every level you get, you'd be asked to bump up one of your stats. Not only is this approach easier, simpler, and clearer, but this will familiarize the less experienced with the mechanic. It'll briefly show up at every level rather than just being some graph in the background. This change presents a few problems, but none without a quick fix. As long as there are still the same number of points, the game will remain balanced as it is. Then all you gotta do is create some type of item you can use to respec your Pokemon with. We've seen items like this already with things like the ability capsule, but currently the Battle Frontier system, where you get items like this, is kinda busted. Number 3. Battle Points. The Battle Frontier, or the Battle Mason, or the Battle Subway, or the Battle whatever, is the place you go to get battle points which you can redeem for items that bring out the game's real depth. This makes it mandatory for crafting competitive Pokemon, which wouldn't be so bad if it weren't so boring. The problem with single player in these games is that the AI doesn't play like a player, it plays like a computer. The whole challenge is hijacking someone else's train of thought without compromising your own, which you can't do against some algorithm with only half of a game plan. Again, I feel like the game is forcing players through hoops when it doesn't have to. This playstyle completely misunderstands the game. Since you don't have a whole team, you can often get hard countered right out the gate. Since battles last so long and you get so little for winning, everything takes forever. And since the CPU is always doing the same stupid things, it isn't even a fun process. Usually the player will just rush it with sweepers, and when the CPU starts making good decisions, it's too late to course correct since you don't have a full team. It's designed like a game loop where as you play it gets easier, but it's never fun, even at the top. Just another arbitrary hoop to get past. Honestly, I struggled to find a solution that isn't just scrap it and scatter the items across the game world, but here's one idea I think could be okay. In addition to the Battle Frontier, playing online ought to net you BP as well. You get 2 points for every KO you get, and if you take all 6, then you get double. Much faster than the battle tree, and even when you lose, it still acknowledges your small victories. This way, the player can get resources while having fun, which I think the game struggles to do as it is. It keeps inventing new game modes when we all just want to play the one that's already here. In addition, players with very little competitive Pokemon could play in Little Cup, where you don't need rare items, or powerful Pokemon to compete. I know you can also get BP from Pokemon Bank, but it seems to just randomly hand out large quantities for nothing, and at that point you might as well just make all the items free in-game. None of these issues are necessarily anti-competitive or anything, they just make it tedious to play the game. Their fixes are easy to implement without harming the game balance, and that's part of what makes them so frustrating. However, this last issue is much more integral to the game and can't be changed without altering how battles take place. Number 4. RNG. There's an unfortunate amount of RNG in the game, and it can often lead to sudden turns in a match's momentum. There are obvious examples like the 1 in 3 chance to instant kill moves, which reward luck over skill, but even the less overtly backwards moves can find a way to ruin your day. Flare Blitz has a 10% chance to burn a target, which you normally use for shutting down physical threats. I'm uncertain why it would be a secondary effect on a move that seems to be an all or nothing physical strike, but in this fight you're viewing right now, it ruined this guy's chance of taking down my physical wall. Since he couldn't poison me after accidentally inflicting a burn, he couldn't find a response to my Avalugg, and it cost him the match. He wasn't trying to burn me, it was just some small RNG that nipped him in the butt. There's some strategies centered around maximizing the odds of immobilizing the target, and these scenarios are what I consider to be RNG at its finest. However, since RNG takes control away from the players, it doesn't make for a good competition. At the end of the day, luck is just not a rewardable skill. It's upsetting to look back on a match and say that you did everything right, but you just got unlucky at the last minute. Matches can be won or lost on a 10% chance to miss, or a 50-50 double protect. I've been bopped from tournaments on them. Kinda trivializes all the mind games and choice plays to just end the match on raw gambling, huh? RNG comes in the form of critical hits, secondary status infliction, immobilization, accuracy, flinching, multi-hit moves, damage calculation, and occasionally even the odd ability. Not only is that too much to cover in this video, but it's also so tightly integrated into the main game that it would be impossible to change without also affecting the game's balance. Because of this, I feel kind of bad bringing the RNG up, but since I would also feel bad bringing it up without offering an alternative, and since I have to bring it up as probably the game's biggest issue, I guess I have a few ideas to share. When it comes to accuracy, the idea is supposed to be that there's a risk and reward between the likeliness of an attack to land and the amount of damage being dealt. But in reality, that disparity just takes away control from the player, and even when it works, it isn't very cathartic. Getting lucky and landing a sheer cold isn't nearly as satisfying as landing a double damage pursuit or finding a safe spot to pull off a sword stance. Taken to its logical extreme, the player should just flip a coin to see who wins. Some moves like Thunder and Blizzard actually use RNG in a more rewarding way, since you can manipulate your odds of landing a hit with the right setup. But those playstyles in turn are again overshadowed by moves like Solar Beam and Moonlight, which have their results change rather than their accuracy. If you predict your opponent is going to use Thunder and use Harsh Sunlight to ruin their accuracy, you still have a 50% chance of going unrewarded. However, if you stuff a Solar Beam with Rain, you'll always see the benefits to your skillful play. If less moves focused on chance and were more static in how they worked, then the player would definitely feel more in control of their match. Plus, it might help new players to have less than 700 moves to learn. Couldn't hurt to take out a few of them. Flamethrower, Heat Wave, and Fire Blast don't need to be different things. Let's just merge them all together and throw them into a TM. Nothing frustrates me more than people being turned away from Pokemon's competitive scene due to the lack of accessibility, and I feel like these changes would definitely draw some more people in. Pokemon has this massive community, but I feel like only a fraction of us even participate in the game's actual meta, which just kinda weirds me out. Sun and Moon were a step in the right direction, with new additions like the digital IV checker and hyper training, but things are still just way too tedious to conquer 6 level 100 Pokemon with perfect genes, perfect training, and all their special secret moves that you can only obtain by rolling a billion dice a billion times. I'm given some hope by the baby steps the series is making towards accessibility and how willing newer games appear towards subverting tradition. I can only hope that these baby steps start to add up soon, because I've been hoping for 2 decades, and the more things seem to be changing, the more they seem to be staying the same. And I'd rather not still be complaining about this trash in my 40s.